Hello, everybody. Hey, Noah. How's it going?
Good. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. I am in a new house. I think this is my first stream from the new house. And so my office is a mess, but it's here, and I have a desk, and we're moved in, so feels good to be kind of slowly unpacking. Um,
I know that
Even if
feeling.
I'm tired,
Yeah.
you know.
I'm also in a new house, so I
Yeah,
understand.
yeah. Um, so so I'm here with Noah, and we're gonna kind of chat about pretty somewhat big project for us. The I think what we're calling is the Reclaim Firewall, right? Like that's the name. Yeah. Um,
Best description we got, probably.
yeah, I mean it is an accurate description. So we're gonna chat about what this project kind of is for us. We don't have a lot to like demo because as of right now, it's mostly a set of scripts and integrations. That's really what it is.
Yeah.
Um, but I thought it would be a good chance to kind of talk about this for a couple of reasons. So the last time you were on a Reclaim TV stream was in the spring, I think, or maybe it was early summer. And we chatted about sort of open source security related tools that are generally available and some of them that we use, basically. And a big part of that was our use of Wazoo as a SIM. And
Yes.
I suppose I should take a second. Do you want to remind everyone and me what SIM stands for?
It's Security Incident and Event Monitoring System.
Okay, awesome. So, and what that does for folks who didn't watch that is it's a service that we run on most of our servers, really, that lets us get a lot of information about what's happening, basically, on the server, and it combs through logs and it presents that data to us, and will highlight certain things that we may want to look into or act upon, things like that. And this, to me, this project is sort of it's very related in a direct sense in that we are actually leveraging some of what Wazoo can do in the firewall, or some of the information it can provide us, but also in the same spirit, right? Of hey, we're taking a thing that most people who run servers, especially web servers, need, which is a responsive and flexible firewall, and trying to do it in an open way. In our case, this is something that we are actually creating ourselves that builds upon existing tools, kind of thing. But I thought it would be kind of a good to kind of catalog. I guess in the way that Jim likes to talk about, blogging is a great way to mark the time and kind of look progress. This is that, I think. This
Yeah.
doesn't this type of conversation may not make a lot of sense to put into the form of a blog post on blog.reclaimhosting.com because we don't really have a lot to announce. It's not like our customers are like getting access to a new thing. This is really just about our tooling and the work we're doing. So I thought this would be a good avenue to talk about it.
Sure.
But that's a lot of context for what I haven't really what we haven't really talked about yet. So what is the Reclaim Firewall? What is this project?
Yeah. The Reclaim Firewall is a open source, kind of custom. I mean, the overlaying wrapper is custom, but it's using open source tools as a base. Um, Basically CLI, like you said, script CLI integration for blocking things either in a centralized way or in a distributed way. It can do either one. You can do a local block, you can do a centrally located distributed block over something like Ansible. Of course, it doesn't come with that. You would have to have that tool already set up or have a
Sure.
system similar to it set up, but it can do that functionality and it's already set up to kind of jump right into it. Just because that's how we have to use it. But that's the gist of what it is. It allows us to block anything that we don't like, either locally or centrally.
And for folks who are unfamiliar, when we talk about a distributed firewall, it's important to not think of Reclaim Hosting as a company. It's not like we're maintaining one server or even a small number of servers. There's literally hundreds of servers all running
350.
their own firewall services. And to be honest, if you wanted to count containers, and in some cases we do, it's many hundreds. you know,
Yeah, well, even more
um,
than I just said. Yeah,
they all yeah they all run their own firewall services, and that is not the part that we are not um, engineering a replacement for like the open source and standardized. There's a few standard Linux firewalls that exist, software firewalls, and so what we're doing is we're using those, but we're scripting and automating around them, and to do not around them, in on top of them, I guess
yeah,
is the
pretty
better
much.
word. Um, and so um, it's not that we didn't have anything like this before. We've used other tools like this, but it's kind of time that we go in this direction because our needs are a little bit different. So do you kind of want to explain like what and we're still using some other alternatives at the moment, but we're moving away from and kind of why?
Sure. And just because I thought of it, to correct myself earlier, SIM is an interchangeable term. It can be security incident event monitoring, but if you look it up, it's also security incident and event management. They're interchangeable, but I just wanted to say it just in
It
case
does
somebody
both.
wanted one and wanted
Yeah,
to
it's kind of
find
like
one.
lamp stack, right? It's like is it PHP, is it Perl, is it
Yeah,
sometimes
exactly.
Python, but usually PHP and Perl. So
But anyway, the reason we developed this is because we're moving away from a application that we use to block to already do this purpose pretty much, but it is not up to our needs anymore. It was working great when we had a smaller server base. Now, not so much. And we already have a better tool, which is called Monarchs, and they are a company that provides like a centrally located cloud-based antivirus. I was about to say
mhm.
AI. That's definitely not it. Um,
Well, I'm sure
antivirus
there's
tool.
some what is it, heuristic analysis. There may be literally some actual
Yeah,
non-markety AI happening
I'm
there,
sure
but
there's
yeah.
machine learning in there somewhere. I'd be surprised if there wasn't. Um, but basically, it's a much more robust antivirus solution than what we are currently using, and we are currently switching things out. However, it did not have a firewall component, which our old AV system did. And that's pretty normal for antivirus. That's not a dig on them. That's a
Yeah.
very normal thing. Um,
BitNinja,
th-
what we used to use, it was kind of uniquely a all-in-one sort of
yeah,
solution for web hosts. I mean, not just web hosts, but it was pretty good at that use case. But yeah, sorry.
no, you're fine. And it's just it got a bit. I don't know. BitNinja is great, but it's great for a smaller number of servers in our experience, and not really what we're trying to do now. So, and honestly, Monarchs has better results for antivirus. So now that we're rolling that out, we needed a firewall solution, and all of our servers run IP tables or net tables, um, which are similar things. Net tables, I'm pretty sure, is the RHEL or RHEL-like distribution, I think, and I could be wrong there, or it's just the newer version of IP tables. I probably should have looked before I opened my mouth, but either way, um, they're basically built-in firewalls for the Linux system, and I think IP tables is a little bit older. But um, the problem with IP tables and net tables by an extension is that when you block things, they go into kind of like a master list, you could say, with regular IP tables. And if you block a lot of things, the system has to read all of those one by one. When it boots up or when it's analyzing traffic on and on, it becomes very slow. It can slow down the system. You can end up DOSing yourself just by blocking something in a
Yeah.
firewall. It's not great. So, a way around that is a very useful tool called, it just left me. IP, do you remember what it was, Taylor? It literally just left me.
Uh, I don't know for
IP
sure.
sets. I got
Oh
it.
yes, yeah. Sorry.
We're good.
Okay.
Just needed a minute to jog the memory.
Yeah, it's all right.
IP sets is kind of like, I mean, it's a different thing, but it's an add-on to IP tables and also net tables, although it's a bit trickier to get it into net tables. But it works when you do. and it basically allows you to store IPs in a flat file system, so just like a text file.
Hmm.
Um, and then you can load all of those at once without any processing overhead for the server like you would by blocking one by one in CSF. Not CSF, sorry, it's another firewall tool, IP tables. I don't know the magic behind this. Whoever made IP
The great
sets,
part is we barely need to, right?
yeah, is amazing. I don't actually know how it works on a technical level, or at least not at that deep of a technical level,
Hmm.
um, as in like its performance overhead. But basically, it does allow you to block a lot more, like millions more IPs, and with pretty much no overhead to the server at all,
Yeah.
which is great, especially because now um, pretty much all web traffic and all traffic in general on the internet is being hounded by both foreign bots and or sometimes domestic bots.
We're
Um,
seeing a lot of domestic bots.
yeah, and AI crawlers, which are really the
Yeah.
same thing, but I like to
Same
make
thing,
the
but it's
difference.
a particular type of domestic bot that we really don't like. And I'll say it seems like AI crawlers are real. The companies deploying these are really uniquely bad at writing them, it seems,
Oh yeah,
or malicious. It's only one of those two. We should go on a side tangent because I am particularly fired up about this. I'm sure you are to some extent too. And then we'll kind of get back to the firewall stuff. But one thing, because mostly just because I want to have this out there because it's something I folks ask about once in a while. Is they'll say like, so you're seeing a lot of traffic from AI crawlers, and it's enough to make a server slow. And what are we talking about there? We're not talking about you're getting hundreds of hits on a website. We're talking hundreds, thousands in some case, hundreds of hits in a second.
milliseconds.
Yeah. Yeah, many, or over a minute, many thousands, like hundreds of thousands of requests, or even above that. So it's not like the Google search index where it spiders a website and then it's kind of over, right? It's
It's
like,
TikTok bite spider, is what it is.
yeah, it's like, yeah, very clearly TikTok is one of the players here that is. I mean, who knows what they're doing with that, right? Like it could just be they're spidering for the purpose of getting text to feed into their own large language model type thing, or maybe they're going to launch a search engine. OpenAI just did. I will say, coincidentally, been seeing a lot of OpenAI search bot in
Watch one the
our
other day.
traffic too. So it's
Yep.
not really that surprising to me. I mean, they announced it a couple months ago, but even before then, we were seeing it. And I'll say, and actually, OpenAI search bot is not quite as bad because it's acting more like,
Your normal search crawler like
yeah,
Google or
where
Facebook.
it finds out about a domain, it tries to click on all the links basically, and then it moves on. We're seeing a lot of things that are just absolutely. They'll focus on a small number of websites in some cases, and they will hit it, millions of times in a day. um, and so that's enough to take a small shared hosting service like ours, right, where you've got a server who's responsible for serving the content of many customers' web pages. It can make the whole thing much slower. Um, I don't know that we've had like literal outages in most cases because of these things, but if you
We've
were
definitely had limited downtime from them for sure.
sure. So, so it's important because from our perspective, you have two choices when faced with this. You can just do nothing and everything is slow. That's not really an option. Or potentially gets worse and it has limited downtime. That's not an option. We're a web hosting company. We want people's sites to work. Um, you can look at what things they're focused on and say, no one's allowed to visit that website for a while, but that's no good for that customer, right? So that kind of solves your problem in one way. But what good is say you have to block access to my main domain, jaden.me. If you have to do that for multiple days, I'm going to leave as a customer. Like you're not able to serve my website anymore. Why would I pay for this service, right? So that's not really a good long-term solution. Sometimes we've in some circumstances done that on a limited basis, and it's more complicated than that, right? It can be that usually we don't actually have to advocate for blocking an entire domain, but That's not ideal. What we prefer to do is identify who these not who, but where these bad actors are coming from. What IPs are they coming from is the main way, quickly, and then curtail that traffic as we can. But that is pretty tricky. It's not like there's one IP. They're not like just plugging in a Raspberry Pi at their house and having it spam a lot of things. They will usually set up entire networks, usually on public cloud services, many times several public cloud services.
If you Azure, step your game up.
Yeah, I will say in particular, we are finding ourselves blocking a lot from Azure. I don't know what the heck is going on, Microsoft, but like I'm positive none of you are listening.
Yeah.
but we outrate like way more than anything else. We're blocking Azure stuff right now. Really crazy. In fact, I've even identified a couple regions that are on my list. Like I've started, and I kind of wear like a lot of hats. I could do some infrastructure stuff, but it's not what I do all day, right? And so the fact that even I am starting to memorize Azure IPs is not good. like, so
75, that's the one.
yeah. So in some cases we will block, on a longer term basis or even a permanent basis, a small subset of some Azure IPs. But more often what we're doing is identifying a pattern and saying, okay, it's this region, we're going to block it for a couple hours, but for the most part, what we're hosting, our customers don't really care if a couple data centers can't visit them. They want people to be able to visit them. And people aren't usually in data centers. That's kind of an oversimplification, but there are times when that can break things, but that is kind of the nature of these types of tools. It's why you don't want to do anything, without considering it, without testing it, things like that. Yeah. So anyway, so our trick is, most firewalls, most of the tools that Noah has talked about, I'm going to tie it back, I promise. Most of the tools that Noah is talking about, they are tools that are firewalls in the somewhat traditional sense, where they say, do not allow traffic on these ports from these IPs, or do or don't. And it's all kind of keyed off of what is the IP the traffic is coming from. And so what we're doing is trying to come up with tools that allow us to put IPs in the system on the simplest level. That's not that hard. That we're doing, but then do the fancier thing, which is look at traffic and analyze what IPs should even go in there. In some cases, doing that without even our intervention, right? That's the kind of end goal. And we're doing we're building there right now. Is that accurate of like what this is supposed to do?
We're testing, have pretty much no intervention at all from our end, which is the end goal. That's the portion where we're using Wazoo, which you mentioned at the start, our SIM, because Wazoo is a very handy function called XDR, which is basically active response. You can place certain rules, and when they trigger, they will do certain things, is the easiest way to describe that. Really, what's happening is that it scans your logs across your server, everything. If it finds anything that's being detected in a rule, it grabs it. It then scans the information inside that log it just grabbed and checks for any hits against a database of things that you've described. So if I see Binance.com, because I just made this earlier, so I know that it's one that actually exists. And we've seen a lot of crawlers use the Binance headers. I don't know if they're actually Binance or they're masquerading as Binance, and I don't care. They're rising the server load, so they're going away. But because I'm a security person, so that's as far as I think about it. But really, it'll take that rule and it'll say, okay, this is a Binance.com. It's in this log file. So this is a rule 987 or something like that, which basically says, this rule says, if you see this in this log file, fire this script on this server. So I found this log got pulled from Smash TV. Run the active response script on Smash TV to block this crawler for 3 hours or permanently.
Mhm.
It kind of depends on the rules that you describe. So it's a very flexible system. And again, this is now that it's tied in with a sim is where you get this flexibility. If you're just running the CLI tool, it is very manual. You do have to block, but it's still centrally located. You can still, like I said, if you're running something like Ansible, block it across entirely with just the CLI. That's very, very handy and extremely possible. But you don't get that manual automation of actually detecting something out of a log and blocking it dynamically. Without running something like a SIM or an active response system. They're separate things. Sometimes they come tied together. Sometimes they don't. Wazoo does, and it's open source. That's why I like it. So
Yeah, yeah. So, part of I think this type of project, especially for a very small team like us, is deciding where to take on, uh, trying to make our own tool for certain things. And then probably more importantly, what is the shape of that tool, right? So for this kind of thing, if you're following us on a technical level, you're going, okay, well, they're talking about probably a handful of different scripts, basically, that they will use in combination with other tools that they're running that are either open source. Well, actually, pretty much everything we've talked about is open source and free to
yeah,
use. The only thing we've talked about that isn't is Monarchs, but that's not actually a firewall thing. That's the impetus for why we're going down this route. Is we wanted a
yeah.
better AV
Not part of the
solution, and
system.
the new AV solution doesn't have a firewall. So,
Yeah,
um, anyway, so um, and I guess what I'm trying to say is that kind of focusing on some glue here. Basically, what we're doing with the Reclaim Firewall is not engineering, a new kernel module for the Linux kernel to do firewall in a different way. No, we're utilizing stuff that exists. We're utilizing Wazoo that exists. We're utilizing IP sets to get things into the Linux firewall, um, and it's more of a new, or at least new to us, and I think possibly broader new way to utilize these disparate systems in an interesting way. Is
yeah,
that a fair way to
absolutely.
say that?
I think it's a lot less of an engineering task and a lot more of an accessibility task. We're trying to take these things that are very esoteric at points and function, especially IP tables, and function in ways that are very strange to even people that
IP
commonly
tables is
use these
scary,
tools.
as
Yeah,
you mentioned a little
exactly.
bit.
I mean, I use UFW all the time. IP tables is
Yeah,
all nothing compared. I mean, it's UFW is easy compared
yeah,
to IP tables. It's just very, very hard to use. So even for people that use it regularly, it's a lot of commands, there's a lot of arguments. It can be very strange, things like that. So at the end of the day, it's like I said, it's more of taking these tools, wrapping them together in a package that can allow for expansion and flexibility, but also make them very easy to use in this package. So I mean, I don't want to say we're not creating anything new, but because all the foundation, like you said, is open source tools that exist. But I think we're creating an easier way to use them in a package is the best way to
yeah.
put it.
I think the unique value here is, surely there are probably giant companies that are doing something like this, using open source stuff, right? Because they're at the other side of the spectrum. We're at a side where we have to be choosy about what tools we license because they need to do exactly what we need. They need to be good and they need to be cost effective. And when you're, say, Google, your concerns around licensing software are different because your scale is different. They have the same things. They want tools that work well, but it's like a completely flipped thing. But my point is also, if you're Google or Amazon or whatever, or companies that we don't think of as much, but are still big and run huge infrastructure. It's very possible that this type of approach, let's feed data from a system into firewalls that already exist, and the feeding part and what goes where is kind of what we're writing. I'm positive someone's used an approach like that before. But what I think is unique and cool about this is that we're doing this as a small team, and and our needs are probably very different from most larger companies where, we have an infrastructure team of like a couple people, and it, the tools need to be accessible. The tools need to be accessible to not just like you and Chris, but like I need to be able to use it. And potentially Jim needs to be able to use it. And potentially support people need to be able to use it.
Absolutely.
We can't we don't really have the flexibility um to put every network related request to a team of hundreds that will act on it, right? Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is the distance between we don't really have tiers of support here, but my point is like the distance between when someone first answers a person's ticket and they're having a problem because their site is slow, and the person who is making like blocks in the firewall is typically sometimes the same person or one person away, if that makes sense. And that is kind of unique. Most people in that situation, or sorry, most teams I suspect in that situation have to turn to an expensive solution instead. And like if you're on a campus, you may have a hardware firewall solution, like I'm aware of like FortiGate. There are other ones that people like better, but but that's not really an option for a company like us because we can't really put a hardware device in front of all of our servers. That doesn't actually track with how we run our infrastructure,
Very distributed.
which is good for us. That it also means that we have less when something goes wrong on one server. It doesn't always mean it's going to affect other things. There are exceptions to that, of course, but that's important for us as sort of a web hosting. It's sort of important for us as a web hosting company. So, so I'm really interested in kind of documenting this, not because I think we're doing something that no one's ever thought of before, but I think we're in kind of a unique space for folks who are trying this idea, trying to make it work for a team. Like I could see a small infrastructure team at a college looking at this work and picking it up. I look at what in my past experience, past jobs, we had some things in cloud, but a lot on premise. We had a big expensive network firewall that we had hardware firewall that we had support for, appliance. But the things in the cloud, those weren't, of course, covered by that firewall, and they basically just didn't. That was just kind of like, yep, everything we put in the cloud is just, we don't have a solution for a good firewall.
And when you're a small team, that's very often the case, is that you go looking for a solution and you hit something like Cisco, who has a firewall you can buy for more than you probably make in an entire year. And
easily in some cases, and then the licensing cost is going to be part of, a good chunk of one person's salary too. Like,
and then, and usually you're a 4 or 5 person IT team at the college level that's maintaining a campus physically. At least it was for me. So, and really the name of the game in that situation is how can we get it done fast and effectively for as low a cost as possible, just because you have to. And that's kind of the goal here, is free, fast, and effective.
And I would extend that too to something Jim talks about a lot. I think internally he's talked about this a little bit, externally too, but one thing that's really important to us at Reclaim as a company is whenever we can to invest in people, not products, not expensive software or expensive tools. And that's not a function of being cheap. It's a function of believing that the valuable thing is the people that work here, what they can learn, and what we can teach other folks that work here or the broader community. Like that's what we value. And I think this is an extension of that, right? This is betting on your ability to use and learn how to effectively use a SIM like Wazoo. It's betting on Chris's ability to understand, I know there's overlap here of people, but of like IP sets and what they're capable of, and it's betting on the team's capability of how can we string those things together and use them, and I think that's really a good thing. It's really valuable, and is an investment sort of
Yeah.
in the team. So one thing that we're, I would say, a little far from, but kind of putting a bow on this investment idea, right, is I do think that we are hoping to put this work out in the open too, at least to some extent. So the scripts that we use to do basic adding of IPs, and also the scripts that will manage loading in text files into IP sets. That's stuff that we basically have done, we're using in some places, but we want to do some work on and then release openly if they would be valuable.
Yeah.
And
For
we're
free.
probably a little ways away from that, to be honest. But I just because I was looking at our internal GitHub on that, and I noticed that Chris wants to rewrite it in Perl before before releasing it publicly.
And I
So it's
want
like,
to do a
okay,
dashboard so it's more accessible to people that aren't technical, and all sorts of stuff. There's a whole bunch of stuff behind that.
yeah, yeah. So, but I am hopeful, for something like us, or for someone like us, once we get it to a state where we feel good about it. Of course, it would not come with any type of support or anything like that, but I think it's more of the value of releasing it openly is saying, here's a thing we're doing. We are contributing in some small way to an open project, and maybe more valuable to see how we are doing it in case it's a similar process is something you'd want to adopt. Maybe literally using our tools, or maybe just using our philosophy.
Or grabbing chunks and using it for yourself. It's open source. You can use. That's what we're. I mean, the whole basis of this project is open source tools. Wouldn't be possible without open source tools. So you can use whatever you want of it, really, and just if you want just the Wazoo portions and want to adapt that to a different sim, then there you go. They'll be there.
Yeah, yeah. So I actually want to address. I've got a question in Discord. Tim from Muhlenberg said, "Hey, this is an awesome session. I'm learning a ton about stuff that is hard to learn about solo because the learning curve is steep. So thank you. So that's awesome." But his question is, this isn't so much a shared hosting consideration, more about Reclaim Cloud. And he says, since bandwidth factors into cloudlet costs, are there cases where these massive AI bot traffic impacts what it costs for folks to run the Reclaim Cloud apps? And this is one of those, I can answer it simply and answer it better. But the first answer is yes. If you get a ton of traffic, it can absolutely impact your costs for something on Reclaim Cloud, or really any other cloud service that is pay for what you use type model. And so, yes, that can have an impact. The thing to think about with something like Reclaim Cloud is, with this type of bot traffic, is we do see it there in certain cases. In fact, I worked with a customer recently who was running essentially a legacy application. They migrated it to Reclaim Cloud because they needed a place to run a app that they could no longer support on their infrastructure. It's not actually old. It's just they don't want to support. In this case, it was Apache Tomcat, and I don't really blame them. But they wanted to run it in Reclaim Cloud so they could kind of let it sit there while they engineer an alternative. And they were using it. It was costing them like $9 a month to host it. And then all of a sudden, it started costing them like $14 a month to host it. And they found that there was something hitting a few random error pages, just again, thousands of times a minute, just constantly, all for months. Very weird, because usually these things eventually move on. And in this case, they didn't. And so what I'm trying to say is, typically the average cost impact for something like this, because you're running a single or multiple containers for one site, typically the actual cost for a customer is like something that is what I would describe as noticeable but negligible. It's like, okay, yeah, it is using more traffic, and it's costing us a couple more dollars a month. So that can have an impact. But then what you have to decide is $3 a month worth my time to track that problem down. And in their case, they had a particular pattern that they were able to use to sort of block the traffic. Basically, I hope this anecdote is somewhat useful, but like basically they found out that if they could redirect that traffic before it hit their Java app, that's Tomcat, that was a much more efficient way, and then their costs went way down. So basically, they wrote essentially a redirect rule, just one line, and that hit their. And I showed them how to put a load balancer in front of their application, and then it didn't hit their Java application because this particular application is just kind of slow. I think I don't know much about Java, but that my perception is it is often like that. So I guess what I'm trying to say, Tim, is the answer is yes. Usually it's not a huge impact. Usually these things start mattering more when you see it happen in larger amounts. And so it is kind of something we're mostly concerned about for shared hosting, because this will typically happen for multiple different sites on a single server. And that's when it really gets slow. I will say the thing with something like Reclaim Cloud is you have more options. They're not always easy, but you do have more options when you're talking about trying to protect one single site. The other thing you can do for personal projects too, or one-off projects, is you could put a service like Cloudflare in front of it, which can do some of this. That is not an option for us because we're not going to, recommend all of our customers switch to Cloudflare for their DNS. That would be hugely disruptive for a lot of people and sometimes not cost effective. But if you're trying to protect a single site, a service, Cloudflare itself or a service like it is usually free. So that can be another thing if you were to get hit with that. And I guess finally to say, Tim, if you ever actually run into that situation, you could just put a ticket in. We could walk you through some of your options. We won't be able to always necessarily do it for you, but we can at least, say, here's probably what we recommend. So, but thanks for the question. Anything to add there, Noah? Or I know I was blabbed about it for like 3 minutes. So
you nailed it as far as I can say.
Cool. Thanks. I think that leaves us in a good place here. For my money, I feel like you did a good job articulating what this thing does, what it will do, why we're doing it. So, is there anything you wanted to add on the Firewall project before we sign off for the day?
Nothing I can think of other than I'm pretty excited to actually release it open source. That's a big highlight for me, just because I'm a big fan of open source software, and I know you are too. So
I think we got a lot of fans of open source around here at Reclaim. But yeah, I am too, and it's something I don't know that it needs me in particular, but it's something I'm kind of hoping we can use as maybe we continue contributing to it as a team as needs arise, basically. I don't know what that actually means yet, but what I'm saying is right now, you and Chris are really the folks who did most of the work on, both the firewall and loading in IP sets and things like that, and the Wazoo integrations. But I wouldn't be surprised if we come up with more ideas, in the future that can. And so I'd love to contribute what I can too. So that would be really cool to have this as our own little open project as a company we can release and maybe people can use or learn from. So
yeah, exactly.
All right. With that, I think I'm going to call it. And thanks everyone watching this now or later. Yeah, stay tuned. I hopefully we'll get that out there in the wild for folks to look at soon. So thanks, Noah, for joining me.
Thank you.